Carl Bergstrom's neighbors smelled the smoke before they saw the flames, and by the time 3 men on horseback made it down the draw to his place, there wasn't a cabin left to save, just the stone chimney standing alone in the snow, black at the throat, still smoking, with the rest of the house collapsed in around it in a heap of glowing timber. Carl got his wife and both boys out alive that night, half-dressed and barefoot in the snow, and that's the only reason this story gets told instead of buried. But he lost everything else. Every tool he owned, 2 winters of stored grain, the bed his own father had built, all of it gone in under 20 minutes, in the coldest week of that whole winter, with nowhere left to sleep but a neighbor's floor. Here's what everybody on that stretch of the Dakota Territory said happened, and here's what they kept saying for years afterward. A bear had come down out of the timber early that fall, thin and hungry, and had been seen twice near the Bergstrom place before the snow ever fell. Folks decided the bear must have knocked over a lamp, or clawed into the woodpile and scattered hot coals, or done something in the dark that started that fire. It was a tidy story. It had a villain you could picture, claws and teeth and a reason. Nobody wanted to blame the alternative, because the alternative meant blaming something every single family on that section had sitting right outside their own door. Here's the thing that ought to stop you, cold friend, the same way it should have stopped every homestead family within 20 miles of the Bergstrom place. That bear never came near the cabin the night it burned. The fire didn't start outside at all. It started inside the chimney itself, in the flue, in the dark, hours after the family had banked their stove and gone to sleep believing they'd done everything right. They had cut their own wood that fall, same as always. They had a fire going every night, same as always. The wood burned, threw off heat, crackled the way good firewood is supposed to crackle. Nothing about it looked wrong, and that is exactly the problem, because the wood Carl Bergstrom fed his stove that winter wasn't ready to be burned yet, not by months, and every fire he lit with it had been quietly coating the inside of his chimney with something that doesn't show itself until the night it finally catches. That's the myth I need you to unlearn today, and I promise you, it's not a campfire tale dressed up to scare you. It's logged in territorial newspaper reports from cabin fire after cabin fire across the whole northern frontier, and it's still the leading cause of home heating fires in this country today, in houses with furnaces and insurance and fire departments a phone call away. The myth said, if the wood lights, if it burns, if it throws heat, it's ready to burn. That myth burned down more frontier homes than every bear on the continent combined, and it's still burning down houses right now, tonight, in exactly the same way. Here's the twist, and I'm going to build you all the way to it today, the same slow way it was handed down to me. The fire that took the Bergstrom place wasn't an accident of bad luck. It was the direct, predictable result of every fire that family had lit that whole season, one quiet layer at a time, inside a chimney none of them ever thought to look up into. There's one habit almost every homestead family let slip the first hard winter they ever faced. One single practice that separated the families who made it through decades of wood stoves and the families who lost everything to their own hearth. We'll get all the way there today. Stay with me, by choice, neighbor. This one's worth your full 20 minutes. I'm Elias Thorne, 7th generation on the Hollis Thorne homestead, out in what used to be called the Dakota Territory, ground my family has worked and wintered on since 1879. My grandmother Ruth was raised on this same claim, and she was a girl of 9, the winter the Bergstrom cabin burned 2 sections over. She never forgot it, and she made sure I never would either. Every fall for the rest of her life, before the first cold night, she walked out to the woodshed herself, no matter her age, and check the stack with her own hands. I used to think it was just an old woman's habit. It wasn't. It was the whole reason our chimney never did what the Bergstroms did. The skill you're about to learn didn't disappear because it stopped mattering. It disappeared because heating got easier. Gas furnaces, electric baseboards, a thermostat on the wall instead of a woodpile out back. Most folks today never have to think about where their heat comes from at all, let alone what that heat is quietly leaving behind inside a flue nobody ever looks up into. But wood stoves and fireplaces never went away either, and neither did this exact danger. The National Fire Protection Association still lists chimney fires from creosote buildup as one of the leading causes of home heating fires in the country, every single winter, in modern houses with modern chimneys. The habit my grandmother kept is not an antique. It's just gone quiet, the same way a lot of old competence goes quiet, right up until the 1 year you need it. By the time we're done today, you'll know exactly when and what wood a homestead family was supposed to cut, how it was split and stacked to actually get ready, how you test whether a piece of firewood is truly seasoned instead of just guessing, and the one invisible process building up inside a chimney that has nothing to do with how well your fire burns tonight. You'll know the habit that kept the Hollisthorne homestead standing through 140 winters, while cabins 2 sections over burned to their foundations. Before we get into the wood itself, pull the trigger on subscribe. Not for me, friend, because the buried skills we drag back into daylight around here, you're going to want the next one. There are 6 pieces to this, 6 in order, and every homestead family that made it through a long winter without losing their home to their own hearth kept every one of them without exception. Miss the first 3, your wood never gets properly ready in the first place. Miss the 4th, you burn it anyway. Miss the 5th, you never understand why that's dangerous. Miss the 6th, you find out the hard way, the same way Carl Bergstrom did. Piece 1. The first thing a homestead family had to get right happened almost a full year before a single stick of that wood ever touched a stove. Picture late winter or early spring on a wooded claim, snow still patched in the shadows, the sap not yet risen in the trees. That is the traditional cutting window, and it was chosen for a real, practical reason. A tree cut while its sap is down carries noticeably less moisture in its wood than one cut in the full growing season, and every bit of moisture you keep out of that log at the start is moisture you don't have to fight out of it later. Species mattered just as much as timing. Homestead families favored dense hardwoods for their main heating supply wherever they grew locally: oak, hickory, ash, elm, sugar maple. These woods burn longer and hotter per cord than softwoods, and just as important for our purposes today, they carry far less resin. Softwoods like pine, spruce, and fir burn fine in a pinch and were commonly used for kindling and quick hot morning fires. But resinous softwood produces considerably more of the terry vapor that we're going to spend the next few pieces talking about. And old-timers who burned it as a primary fuel all winter long knew to sweep their chimneys far more often because of it. The rule that mattered most of all was simple arithmetic, and it is the rule most modern people trying this skill get wrong before they ever strike a match. You cut this year's wood for next year's fire, not this year's. A homestead family worth its salt was always a full season ahead, with last year's wood seasoned and ready in the shed, and this year's wood freshly cut and only just beginning its long dry down. Falling behind that rhythm, even by a single season, is where this entire danger begins. The mistake most beginners make picturing this is assuming any dead-looking, gray or dry-feeling log found lying in the woods is ready to burn. It might be seasoned, It might also be waterlogged from lying against wet ground for years, which is arguably worse than freshly cut green wood, since it can carry moisture deep into the grain with nowhere to go. Cut your own, know its exact age, and you remove the guesswork entirely. This week, if you burn wood yourself, walk your woodpile and find out honestly how far ahead you actually are. Not how much wood you have, how old it is. That's the real number that matters, and it's the number Carl Bergstrom didn't have an honest answer to the winter his house burned. Piece 2. Once the wood was down, the real seasoning work started, and this is where most of the actual seasoning happens or fails to happen. Split the wood as soon as reasonably possible after cutting, while it's still green. Green wood splits far easier than seasoned wood, since drying hardens and toughens the fibers, and splitting exposes far more surface area to the air, which is the entire engine that drives seasoning. A round, unsplit log can take years to dry properly. A well-split piece takes a fraction of that time. Stack it off the ground, always, on rails or scrap lumber, never directly on dirt or grass. Ground contact wicks moisture straight back up into the bottom rows, no matter how long the wood sits there. And homestead families who stacked straight on the earth were often the ones burning damp wood, without ever understanding why it never seemed to dry. Stack in a single row wherever possible, not a thick block, since airflow through the stack is what actually pulls moisture out, and a tightly packed block of wood dries painfully slowly in the center no matter how long it sits. Orient the stack to catch prevailing wind and, where possible, full sun, and if you cover the top against rain and snow, leave the sides open. A tarp wrapped fully around a woodpile traps moisture inside it just as surely as it keeps rain off, which is a mistake almost as common as not covering the wood at all. Government agricultural extension bulletins from the era and modern Forestry Service guidance both land on the same rough number for properly seasoned hardwood cut, split, and stacked correctly. 6 months minimum for softer, less dense woods, but a full 12 months, a complete year through every season, for dense hardwoods like oak to reach truly low moisture content all the way through the piece, not just on the surface. The mistake 9 out of 10 people make here, even today, is judging seasoning by how the wood feels on the outside after a few dry, sunny weeks. Surface moisture leaves fast. Moisture trapped deep in the core of a split log leaves slow, sometimes taking many months longer than the bark and outer inch would suggest. A piece can feel bone dry in your hand and still be carrying real moisture at its center. Size matters here, too, more than most people expect. Split pieces roughly 4 to 6 inches across the widest face season noticeably faster and more evenly than thick, oversized rounds, since there's simply less distance for moisture at the core to travel before it reaches open air. A homestead man splitting for next winter's stove splits smaller than a man splitting kindling for tonight's fire, because he was thinking in seasons, not in the next hour. Placement of the woodshed itself mattered on a working claim, too. A shed built with a solid roof, but open slatted sides, facing the prevailing wind, and getting at least a few hours of direct sun through the day, dried a season's wood far faster and far more evenly than a stack tucked into a shaded, still corner of the yard, where damp air simply sat against the bark all winter and all summer without ever moving. If you had a choice of where to build, you built for wind and light, not for convenience to the back door. This week, if you're building or maintaining your own woodpile, check your stacking method against these 5 things. Split to a modest, even size, off the ground, single row for airflow, top covered, but sides open, and placed somewhere the wind and sun can actually reach it. 5 small corrections most people never think to make, and every one of them is the difference between wood that's actually ready and wood that only looks ready. Piece 3, Time Alone, tells you nothing for certain, friend, which brings us to the actual test, the one that removes the guessing entirely. Picture a homestead man out at the woodshed in late autumn, pulling 2 split pieces off the stack, one in each hand, sizing up whether this year's wood is finally ready to feed the stove. He doesn't have a moisture meter. He doesn't need one, because there are 4 honest signs, and a good woodsman checked everyone before he ever trusted a piece to the fire. Look at the end grain first. Properly seasoned wood develops visible splits and cracks radiating outward from the center of the cut face as it dries and shrinks. Green wood shows a smooth, tight end grain with no cracking at all. This is often the single fastest tell, and it costs nothing but a glance. Look at the color next. Freshly cut wood tends toward a paler, almost creamy tone just under the bark. As it seasons, that color fades toward gray, sometimes with the bark loosening or falling away entirely on well-aged pieces. A log that still looks fresh and pale under the bark almost never is. Feel the weight. This is the test that fools the fewest people because it's hard to argue with your own arms. A green log is dramatically heavier than the same size piece fully seasoned, since you are quite literally carrying water out of the woods that hasn't left the wood yet. Pick up 2 same-sized splits from different ages in your stack, and the difference is often obvious immediately. And then the test my grandmother swore by above all the others, the one she taught me with my own hands the first fall I was old enough to help stack wood. Knock 2 split pieces together, end to end, the way you'd knock 2 boards. Well-seasoned wood gives a sharp, hollow, almost musical clack. Green or wet wood gives a dull, flat thud, heavy and lifeless, the sound of water still sitting inside the fibers. She called it listening to the wood, and she never lit a stove with a piece that failed that sound test, no matter how badly the cabin needed warming that night. The mistake beginners make on this piece is trusting a single sign alone. A piece can look gray and cracked on the outside from sun exposure while still carrying real moisture in its core, especially with larger rounds. Check all 4 signs together, cracking, color, weight, and sound, and you'll rarely be fooled by wood that only looks ready. This week, if you keep any wood at all, pull 3 pieces from different parts of your stack and run this test on each one honestly. Don't check the piece on top that's been catching the most sun. Check one from the middle, one from the bottom, one you'd normally never bother testing. That's where the truth about your woodpile actually lives. Pattern break, friend. Everything up to here, a diligent homesteader knew and did without fail. What comes next is where the Bergstrom family, and plenty of families like them, made the one decision that felt completely reasonable and turned out to be the whole cause of what happened that winter. Piece 4. The mistake that felt like common sense, made in the coldest part of the season by people who were doing their honest best. Picture late January on a hard winter, wood reserves running lower than anyone expected, the cold outside deep enough that a family cannot simply choose to go without a fire tonight. The seasoned wood in the shed is running thin. The wood cut just this past fall, only a few months seasoned instead of the full year it needs, is sitting right there, split, stacked, looking for all the world like ordinary firewood. It goes into the stove because the alternative, a cold cabin in a hard winter, isn't really an alternative at all. And here's the trap, the same one that's caught careful, competent people for 200 years. That wood lights. It burns. It throws real heat into the room, maybe not quite as clean or as long as fully seasoned wood, maybe with a bit more smoke and a bit more hiss and pop at the ends, but it burns, and a fire that burns and warms a cold room feels, in every way, a tired and freezing family can judge in the moment, like it's doing its job correctly. That feeling is not wrong about the heat. It is completely wrong about what that fire is doing to the chimney it's venting through, and that's the entire gap this myth lives inside. A fire can look successful in every way a person standing in front of it can judge, throwing light, throwing heat, burning down to honest coals, while still producing something dangerous, rising invisibly out of sight above the damper, building up minute by minute in a place nobody in that room will ever look, until it's too late to matter. Territorial newspaper accounts from cabin fires across the frontier repeat this same detail with striking consistency. Families who lost their homes almost never describe careless behavior. They describe ordinary winters, ordinary fires, wood that burned the way wood is supposed to burn, right up until the night it didn't. Modern fire investigators looking at chimney fire cases today find the identical pattern. It is very rarely a household doing something obviously careless. It is very often a household burning unseasoned or resinous wood for weeks or months without any outward sign that anything at all was wrong. The mistake here isn't laziness or ignorance. It's the same wind-sealing instinct we've talked about before, in a different shape, applied wrong under pressure. A fire that burns and warms you reads as a fire doing everything correctly. Most careful, hardest-working families were sometimes the ones this happened to, because being desperate enough to burn what you have on the coldest night of the year is not a character flaw. It's just how cold works on a tired household with a thin wood pile. This week, if you burn wood, make the honest rule now, before you're desperate, not during the night you need it most. Seasoned wood only, no matter how cold it gets, no matter what's sitting closer to hand. That single line is the hinge this entire story turns on. Now we get to the piece almost nobody explains clearly. The reason none of it ever announced itself inside the Bergstrom cabin until the chimney itself was already burning. That's next. Piece 5, why none of it showed a single warning sign inside that warm, ordinary-looking room. A fire needs 3 things to burn clean and complete: fuel, oxygen, and enough heat to fully combust everything the wood releases as it burns. Fully seasoned, dry wood burns hot enough and clean enough that nearly everything it releases as smoke gets consumed in the flame itself, leaving very little behind on its way up the flue. Unseasoned or resinous wood changes that picture substantially. The trapped moisture in green wood cools the fire as it burns, since energy that would otherwise go toward heat gets spent boiling that water off first. A cooler burning fire cannot fully combust everything the wood is releasing, and what escapes unburned rises up the flue as a mix of smoke, water vapor, and sticky, tar-like organic compounds still carrying real fuel value. As that mix rises through the chimney, it cools, and cooling is exactly what causes those tar-like compounds to condense out onto the interior walls of the flue, the same way steam condenses on a cold window. This is creosote, and it builds up in layers, fire after fire, week after week, entirely out of sight above the damper, in a part of the house nobody in that family will ever have a reason to look at directly. Here's the part that made this so quietly deadly for so long. Creosote itself is flammable, and it builds up thickest in exactly the part of the chimney that gets hottest during a strong fire. Layer after layer of unseasoned wood smoke accumulates over weeks into a thick, glazed, tar-like coating, sometimes described in old accounts as looking almost like black candle wax lining the flue. It sits there, patient, through every ordinary fire that never quite gets hot enough to ignite it. Then, on some particular night, a fire burns a bit hotter than usual, maybe from a run of drier wood finely mixed in, maybe just from a bigger blaze built against a colder night, and the flue temperature climbs high enough to finally ignite that accumulated creosote directly inside the chimney itself. What follows is a roaring, extremely hot, largely invisible fire burning inside the flue structure, often producing a distinct low roar like a freight train or rushing wind, dense black smoke pouring from the chimney top, and sparks. That intense, sustained heat can crack chimney masonry, ignite wood framing hidden inside the wall the chimney passes through, or throw sparks directly onto a woodshake or thatch roof. None of the build-up leading up to that moment gives any warning inside the living space of the home. No smell, no smoke in the room, no visible sign at all, because the entire process happens above the damper, outside the house, inside a structure built specifically to carry smoke away and out of sight. A family can burn a chimney fire's worth of fuel into existence over an entire season and never once suspect anything is different about their fire at all. Old-timers who never had a word for creosote still understood the pattern of it well enough to fear it by another name. Journals and farm bulletins from the era describe cleaning out chimneys to clear the black glaze or the tar off the stones, and warn plainly that a chimney gone too long without cleaning was, in their words, asking for a fire in the flue. They didn't need the chemistry to respect the danger. They only needed to have seen, or heard about, a neighbor's roof go up in the night, with no lightning, no lamp, and no bear anywhere near the place. I'm not a chimney inspector, friend, and I want to be straight with you the way I'd want someone straight with me. If you ever hear a loud roaring or rumbling sound coming from your chimney, or see dense, dark smoke pouring from the top, or hear a repeated popping sound from inside the flue, treat it as an active chimney fire immediately. Get everyone out of the house, call the fire department, and if you can safely do so without delay, close the stove's air intake and damper to help starve the fire of oxygen. Do not go up on the roof or attempt to fight a chimney fire yourself. This week, if you burn wood in your own home, learn what a working carbon monoxide detector and a working smoke detector near your chimney actually sound like. And if you've never had your chimney professionally inspected, that's this week's task. 15 minutes and a flashlight from a chimney sweep does the one job none of a homestead family's 5 senses could ever do on their own. It looks at what the fire itself can never show you. We've covered the timing of the cut, the splitting and stacking, the honest test for readiness, the mistake that feels like common sense, and exactly why none of it announces itself. There's one piece left, a habit my grandmother Ruth kept every single autumn of her life. The reason the Hollis Thorne homestead never once saw what the Bergstrom place saw. That's next, piece 6, the habit that stood between a normal winter and what happened 2 sections over. Every homestead family who kept their home, standing through decades of wood stoves and fireplaces, whether they could explain the chemistry of it or not, kept one discipline without fail. They cleaned the chimney every single season before the heavy burning of deep winter began, using a weighted brush or a bundle of brush and chain worked up and down the flue from the roof or the hearth, knocking loose whatever had built up since the last cleaning. My grandmother did this herself every October for as long as she was physically able, and she taught me to do it the fall I turned 13. She never explained it as chemistry. She called it clearing the black off the walls, and she said her own mother had never gone a winter without doing it. Not once, not even in years when there was barely time for anything beyond keeping the family fed. It wasn't optional the way some homestead chores drifted into optional. It was as fixed a part of the calendar as slaughtering the hog or stocking the root cellar. The second half of her discipline was just as unbending. She never burned wood that hadn't earned its full season of drying, full stop, no matter how cold the night got or how thin the seasoned pile had grown. If the seasoned wood ran short before spring, the answer was fewer fires, banked lower, blankets piled higher, not a trip to the green pile out back. She'd tell me that a cold night is a hardship you live through. A chimney fire is one you don't always get to. Here's why this piece still matters to you today. Sitting in a house with a modern insert, or a wood stove tucked into a finished den. The physics hasn't changed one bit since Carl Bergstrom's winter. The National Fire Protection Association still points to creosote buildup from unseasoned or improperly burned wood as one of the leading causes of home heating fires every single year. In houses with smoke detectors and insurance and a fire department minutes away instead of hours. Chimney sweep companies and modern fireplace manufacturers both want you buying their services and their appliances, and neither one of them is lying to you by doing so. But neither one is exactly shouting from the rooftops the one free habit that prevents most of this outright, because there's no product to sell in telling you to simply burn well-seasoned wood and clean your own flue once a year. That's not a conspiracy, neighbor. That's just how 140 years of convenience quietly let one unglamorous habit go quiet. So here's your skill, whole and yours. Cut a full year ahead, favoring dense hardwood over resinous softwood for your main heating supply, timed for when the sap is down. Split it soon after cutting. Stack it off the ground in a single row for airflow. Cover the top and leave the sides open. Test before you trust it. Cracked end grain, faded gray color, noticeably lighter weight, and the sharp hollow clack instead of the dull wet thud. Never burn wood that hasn't earned its season, no matter how cold the night gets or how thin the seasoned pile has grown. Know the warning signs of a chimney fire already underway. A roaring sound, dense black smoke repeated popping. Get everyone out and call for help immediately if you ever hear or see them, and clean the flue every single season before deep winter sets in. The same unbending habit my grandmother Ruth kept every October of her life without a single year's exception. This was never really about firewood, friend. It was about understanding that a fire can look and feel like it's doing everything right in the one place you can see it, while quietly building the exact thing that burns your home down in the one place you never think to look. That's not superstition, and it's not doom talk. That's ordinary competence, carried in the hands of every family who made it through a long winter with their home still standing come spring. And it costs you nothing at all to carry it back into your own house tonight. You don't have to overhaul your whole woodpile this weekend. Do one thing. Walk out to wherever your firewood sits, pull 3 pieces from different parts of the stack, and run the 4 honest tests on each one. Cracking, color, weight, and the sound. That's the whole entry ticket. That's your grandmother's habit, handed to you. Somebody just didn't get the chance to hand this one down to the Bergstrom family before that January came. That's what I was here for tonight. Tell me down below, did your family keep a wood-burning stove or fireplace growing up? And did anyone ever teach you how to tell if a piece of wood was really ready to burn? Different regions tested it different ways, and the story that pulls the most comments is the one I go deep on next. Your great-grandparents kept their families warm and their home standing through winters that would test anyone. And they did it with knowledge this ordinary, this unglamorous, and this easy to let slip. Don't let it die on your watch. Next time, the frostbite myth that made good men lose fingers and toes that would have healed on their own, and the reason Army field manuals had to be rewritten twice to correct it. Keep the old ways they kept.